report, if you don't invest in rural areas, transformation...
I'm Hans Herren, presently the president of the Millennium Institute in Washington, D.C. The present system is based a lot on this globalization issue, so don't worry, we'll produce it somewhere when it's needed. We'll produce enough in one place of the world and we'll ship it to the other side when it's needed. So that's the one thing which I think it's a wrong concept, because countries need to be food self-sufficient to a certain degree. I mean, to the maximum degree it's possible. That's the one thing. Because if they don't produce food, you're going to have a lot of people who have no jobs, so how would they have access to food? So even if it's available somewhere, doesn't mean it's accessible. So our global food system has a problem of not only the distribution part, but where it is grown, who has access to the food, and also of its use, because that's another aspect which is important. How is it used, when and where? So we have this major problem there. That's sort of on the accessibility. On the other hand, also the way it's produced creates a lot of problems right now, because we have an agriculture which is actually based in using energy, more energy than it produces. That's sort of in the north. In the developing countries, agriculture is based on mining what's there, mining the soil nutrients and not replacing them. So we actually have, never mind where you look, we have totally unsustainable systems which are dependent on external inputs. And as we look forward, we have shrinking natural resources, water, energy, oil, for example, also land, because we have degraded a lot of land, and as we use land for buildings, roads, warehouses, so again, we have less land available. So because of all these constraints, I think we ought to very fast shift the way we do agriculture to something which is much more in tune, in harmony with the environment, so that it will actually last for the long haul and not for the short haul. The ISAD report, which stands for the International Assessment of Agricultural Knowledge, Science and Technology for Development, was a report commissioned by the UN. So that's important to know that 6 UN agencies and the World Bank actually commissioned this report. It was written by a multi-stakeholder group of authors, 400 of them. So it really represents all your knowledge base and science base and technology base in agriculture, like say year 2008. That's when the report came out. So that's the situation then. Well, we can summarize it into a few words. Business as usual is not an option. Basically what we found is that we need a change in paradigm from the present agriculture system. And so the paradigm which we have so far was the paradigm of a green revolution. People were very unhappy that it never happened in Africa, so that's why they have so much problems. In Asia, we had this big green revolution which took on. Now again, we know that although it produces more food, it created also a number of side effects which were not really intended, but nevertheless they were there and we need to deal with. And actually the West, North America, Europe, I mean, we are using the basic principles of the Green Revolution, which can be summarized as seeds and inputs. Eventually that turned out to produce more per hectare, more starch in particular. We diluted basically our nutrition in our crops, so we actually ended up to have less nutrients. We have more water also in that type of food. So we then generated a whole set of problems on health, as we all know. It created a problem on the farms who become larger and larger to be more efficient. So people started to leave the land and do other things. So we have this area leaving the countryside. And also we eventually realized that this is an agriculture based on non-renewable inputs. The water partly, because we use more and more, fertilizer, pesticides, which are the latter always based on oil, which is a finite product. So the time basically we say now is to learn the lessons and figure out a system which is actually generating energy positively, which is producing quality food in the different areas of the world, who produces also a diverse basket of food, so that we can cater for the culture aspect and also the health aspect of food. So we need, this means a radical change. It's probably the best system we have come up with yet. Doesn't mean that it cannot be improved. We need more science there also, actually, to see, you know, how can we make this relevant to the many different areas of the world, because, you know, what you do in one area is not the same in another. Also, you know, we have small farms, big farms, so I think that will continue. So how can we actually also get the larger farms as well as the smaller farms into a more sustainable or an ecologically intensive system? I mean, that's what basically we are looking for. So it's not so much a sustainable intensification as actually an ecological intensification. We have evidence that already from 2 days research, and not only research, but actually implementation of this research in terms of agroecological practices, be them organic, biodynamic and all this, that they can produce enough to not only nourish today's population as well as the one in 2050 of 9 or 10 billion people. And why do we say this? Is because in the developed countries we produce more than enough. So even if we were to produce ecologically more in tune with the environment, a bit less, we'll still be okay. In the developing countries, the potential is enormous. I mean, we can fairly easily double, treble the production with ecological intensification. It's not a problem. It's been shown by many papers and research document. So the point really is to set aside those vested interests working against this and start to implement what we know will work for the consumer and also work for the farmer, but above all, work for the states. Because the states are all broke. I mean, they can't continue to pay all this money in terms of extra health care, subsidies. And I think that if we have an agriculture system which actually can take care of itself while actually doing a lot of good, why not do it? Important change. We're going forward in actually a more scientific and a more knowledge-based type of agriculture. And I think the UK, like other European countries, I think there is a great scope there to go back to some of the proven knowledge we had and bring it forward with the new science into a system which again is ecologically sustainable but also ecologically productive. And so that's, and it can be done. I have no doubt of it, because there are enough examples, published results, that it can be done. I think the issue really becomes when we need now to get the consumers on board, because the consumers have to start to demand more diversity and they have to demand more quality. So the education of the consumer end is enormous. The need is enormous, and the farmers will shift the production according to the demand. Right? We know that. So if people just come and want corn-based products and meat, they don't care where it comes from. That's what the farmers will produce. And why does he do that, or she does that? Because those consumers and the people in between will push the prices down to a level where the farmers hardly can make it. So they have actually little say. They execute, they don't really direct. And I think farmers have to again become more in the driver's seat together with the consumers, and the people in between will have to follow those trends and not determine them as they do now. It's not the real diversity, because I mean you may get a fairly large diversity of, let's say, vegetables, I mean, but then you start to look at the grains, the cereals, you know, I think it's very pauper from that side. And I think we need to promote again more diversity in grain production, more diversity also in the meat production and how this meat is produced. So there are a number of rules we know to make the system more sustainable, and that can be done through a number of rotations. And those rotations have to include some grasses for a couple of years or 3, and then maybe you go on with other crops, legumes and root tuber crops. You go on with some grains. So we need this complexity in order to regenerate the soil and not just empty it of all the nutrients. I think it has to be part of it. I don't see how you cannot have it part of it, because you want, first of all, this deep-rooted crops, grasslands, to take the nutrients up, and you need animals actually to close the carbon cycle on farm. So that's why actually the report very clear says animals need to be on farm and out of the factories. So we have to be very sensible, I think, about some of these issues for sustainability, and that the animals belong there. Now, the question is, what do you do with animals and how long do you keep them? And there's a whole other piece of knowledge and science there, which has also to become part of that sustainability. I don't think those highly productive cows, which produce 40 liters of milk or something, can hardly walk anymore, are fed grain. I mean, that's certainly not the solution. And depending where you are, you're going to have two cows, you may have sheep, goats, chicken, and so that mix, pigs and all this, has to be there too. And just like with crops, we also need a larger varieties of races, which more adapted to the special conditions. And I think to have those mega animals, which actually I'm amazed at when I saw this, I couldn't believe it. At Edinburgh, I went to the fair there, and I grew up on a farm, so I've seen cows before, but all of a sudden this thing have doubled. In 20 years, they've almost doubled the size. I don't think this can be good for the environment eventually. So I think we have to come to our senses here. And why do we do certain things? Why do we do monocrops? Why do we do animal factories? In the end, it's just to have a cheaper product. And I think that food cannot be cheap. I mean, it has to be, you have to get value for your money. And that means good nutrition, a good stewardship of the environment, so that our children also will have some food. So I think we have to start to think in terms of the price different. It is, you are buying a future. You don't just buy basically some food which is then the best. I think we can. I mean, to me, it looks like the signs are there that the consumers are starting to become more critical about what they eat, and the climate change will actually force the politicians to take action. And once you know that agriculture is responsible for half of the greenhouse gases, at least in the Western countries, I think there won't be a much easier place to go to and start to make the change. Because that's going to be the most important thing all of a sudden. And I think if we have just a few more catastrophes of some sort, droughts or floods, I think people start to realize, oh, what's going on here? Agriculture, half of the greenhouse gases. Maybe you ought to start there. Because it would actually, if you think about it, it's probably the easier place where you can start. Because we know what to do, it's not so we don't know. And the cost to do that, I don't think it's going to be that enormous compared to the cost to shift other areas of the economy around. So maybe we can just hope that things will go faster and that the brick will hit the head faster than it would normally, just to actually make this change a reality.